we bring you Killer Wives, Episode 20, Unnatural Causes. These are the case facts against Lana Clayton, who poisoned her own husband. Isn't trust a bitch? Clover, South Carolina. Famous for the McDowell Nature Center and Preserve, Crowder's Mountain State Park, but also made famous for the murder of one Mr. Stephen Clayton.
Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant. You have a call back for 86 Central? Negative K, nothing further. Just see the cabbie on the corner.
Is it possible that a man could be killed with a single glass of water? A divorced nurse who worked at the North Carolina branch of the VA medical system meets and dates the man of her dreams, a self-made millionaire who owned a mansion with a lakefront property. Retired now, the wildly prosperous businessman and wrestling coach lived a life of leisure long before he began to date the woman that will one day become his future bride. Yes, Stephen D. Clayton, age 64, formerly of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was a graduate of the Miami Military Academy and the Miami Springs Senior High School, where he was celebrated athlete in track, football, and Greco-Roman wrestling. He worked his way through college as a construction laborer and plasterer. So as you can see, he was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He earned it. Stephen received his Bachelor's of Science from Florida State University and was a certified public accountant who was greatly admired by his colleagues. Stephen later founded Physical Therapy Resources Company of America, which made him a millionaire and gave him the ability to retire at age 40. That in itself was remarkable. Now, Mr. Clayton overcame childhood hardships and adversity and had an indomitable spirit. He was an entrepreneur, a visionary, and a brilliant business strategist who had a passion for learning and critical thinking. He continuously challenged himself to greater levels of success while helping others along the way, including children's charities and volunteer wrestling coach. Now, Stephen was truly a magnanimous man, and his broad circle of friends was infinitely diverse. He enjoyed spending time in the company of gardeners and janitors, as much as he did with captains of industry and finance moguls. He had no mere acquaintances, as everyone he befriended became part of his enormous extended family. And in a lot of these Killer Wives cases, they follow the same pattern. Now, virtually all of the youth who were mentored by Steve have gone on to become highly successful in their chosen fields. In the year of his life culminating in great success, the millionaire and nurse would decide to get married. That marriage would last 8 long years before Lana Sue Clayton would devise a plot so sinister to deprive her husband of his life that it would change the entire system of autopsies performed throughout the world today. You see, Lana poisoned her husband slowly for years, many believe, but hastily on the last 3 days of his life. Now, it is known now that she poisoned him with a colorless, odorless, and completely tasteless clear product that many people use each day. Now, there is no telling where she got the idea to use this product in this way. It could have came from an internet search or from it being used this way in the movie The Wedding Crashers, in which the characters played by Vince Vaughn poisoned the water of the character played by Bradley Cooper to take him out of the running for his girlfriend. So she could have got that in two different directions. Now, that poisonous product is Visine Clear Eyes. Visine Clear Eyes. Now, a note of caution here, as a viewer. Please understand that everything I'm about to demonstrate for you here is similar to the way that Lana killed her husband by poisoning him and should not be repeated at home. Between the 19th and 21st of July in 2018, Miss Lana Clayton used a few drops of this product on the first day to test its strength. Then a few more drops to incapacitate his physical strength on the second day. Can you imagine? She used the entire little container in her husband's water to kill him on the third day. So you can imagine just squeezing this thing till it was all gone. Now, what is within this innocuous bottle of Visine, which is made up mostly of water that could kill a 200-pound man in less than 24 hours, you may ask? Well, what killed Lana's husband was the active ingredient of most eye drop products for over the last 50 years, tetrahydrozoline. Tetrahydrozoline is a perfectly safe outside of the body as an eye whitener, as its properties were meant to shrink your more larger inflamed blood vessels in the eye. But inside of the body, this chemical is dangerous as cyanide. Tetrahydrozoline can be absorbed through your gastrointestinal tract into your main blood circulation much more readily and then travel to your heart and central nervous system. There, it can get the drop on you. Just a pun. It'll slow your heart rate and lower your blood pressure to dangerous levels. It can also lead to a drop in body temperature, a coma, and of course, death. Symptoms may include coma, difficulty breathing or no breathing, blurred vision, change in pupil size, blue lips and fingernails, fast or slow heartbeat, change in blood pressure, high at first, low later, headaches and irritability, low blood temperature and low body temperature, nausea and vomiting, nervous tremors, seizures, and finally, weakness. And these were the many symptoms that Miss Clayton experienced as she tried to get him to be poisoned. He struggled to stay alive after being poisoned. I must say, this Killer Wise episode reminds me of the old black and white movie called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. In that movie, one elderly sister tried to alienate from the public and starve and then kill her younger sister, who she was jealous of for her income and successful career in acting, just before she tried to kill her. Now, in that movie, her sister was incapacitated as well. In this case, 3 days prior to his untimely demise, Stephen Clayton's wife did the very same thing. No one could reach or was allowed to reach Stephen by phone, not even his own sister. This was purposeful, because on the day of the first poisoning of Stephen, Miss Clayton took her husband's phone and threw it out. She threw it out to the lake just in front of the mansion. Now, it was never found after that. His wife Lana kept her personal cell phone away from the room that she made her husband bedbound and depended upon her for his connection to the outside world. That's amazing. He can't talk to you, and he's not allowed to talk to anybody else. Now, to complete her devious betrayal, she ensured that there was no landlines on the second floor of that mansion that week. Now, with her millionaire husband now incapacitated by being poisoned with each glass of water she made him drink, he couldn't even find the strength to get up and go to the bathroom. Couldn't be. He had to do it in the bed.
So you may better understand the crime scene, let me give you a tour of the multi-million-dollar mansion where it took place. This is the front of the mansion, on the lake. Here is a back view of that same mansion on the lake. Next we go to the inside foyer. And now the living room. The kitchen of the multi-million-dollar mansion. which leads to the dining room, the bathroom, of which there were many, the main bedroom, of which there were many, the lower porch on the back of the house, the porch that led to the lake on the back of the house. Here is a view of the dock in back of the house. Here's an overhead shot of the dock on the back of the house. And this is a lake view from the back of the house.
Police notes during the subsequent investigation would annotate after Stephen was dead that Mr. Clayton's clothing, his bedding, mattress, and the floor around the bed were coated in his urine. Treating a human being like this was bad enough. Treating a human being like this you are married to is even worse. Can't imagine. But ultimately, treating a human being like this, and you are a registered nurse by profession, and a person who cleans up people who can't make it to the bathroom at the hospital for a living, goes way beyond the pale. If Mr. Clayton at one time trusted his health to his wife on the first day of that poisoning, he would not have after realizing by the third that she had no good intentions towards him. For on that third and final day of his life, Mr. Clayton summoned up the last bit of strength that he had on this planet and attempted to make his escape good from the captivity that went along with his maltreatment from his own wife of 8 years. Stephen stumbled out of bed, down the upstairs hallway, and down the staircase in an attempt to save his own life. Now at this point, it is unclear whether he passed out while escaping down those stairs, or whether his urine-soaked wet feet caused him to slip and fall down the entire flight of stairs. Either way, his body came to rest face down at the bottom of those custom-made staircases he had built. In Stephen's attempt to survive, he had tumbled his way down to the bottom with his heart pounding from being sedentary and struggling to hold on and breathe over the last 3 days. Unfortunately for him, he only made it to a face-down position at the bottom of those stairs before he finally succumbed to the poisoning and to the death by the hands of his own wife. His wife, who never anticipated he would attempt his escape, sprang into action after hearing his body tumble down those stairs. After she was sure he was dead, she manufactured an alibi concerning her whereabouts during his death that would grow minute by minute. She had to think on her toes now, you see. She had achieved his death like she intended to. But how to spin his death as to make it appear as if she was an innocent, caring wife instead of a cold-blooded murderer who had nothing to do with this man's death. And then it came to her in a flash. Simply involve other people in the framing of her husband's death as an accident brought on by his recent vertigo illness that he was released from the hospital for. You see, Stephen had been recently released from the hospital on a diagnosis of vertigo. Now, this would have helped his wife in manufacturing a story that it was the vertigo that caused her husband to fall down those stairs, and not because she poisoned him recently. Months after his death, it would be reasoned that Stephen did not die or have vertigo. What he had was the side effects of mimicking vertigo that come from someone being poisoned over years instead of days. Vertigo is a condition where a person has a sensation of moving or surrounding objects moving when they are not. Now, often it feels like the room is spinning or swaying movement. This may be associated with nausea, vomiting, sweating, or difficulty walking. It is typically worse when the head is moved. When you move your head with vertigo, it feels even worse. The room is spinning even faster. Vertigo is the most common type of dizziness. But with the lack of love Lana exhibited towards her husband over the last 3 days, one would not be surprised that she didn't push him down those stairs herself. With his body laying flat against the expensive imported wood of that 1840s-style Greek-Roman revival house he had made for her, she came with an idea to keep her butt out of prison. She would involve her neighbors in a form of pretend hysterics reminiscent of just about any daytime soap opera you could watch. Instead of calling the police herself, it would be better if her neighbors were introduced to the body of evidence first, which would present a better alibi of the concerned wife for her husband. Now, then the optimal moment presented itself for her. In the distant background, outside, she could hear a growling sound that grew closer and closer. On that private peninsula, she could hear a Harley-Davidson Hall-class type of motorcycle that would pass by her residence in a matter of moments. She left the side of her husband's chilling body, wondering what she was going to do next, to a solid plan of action and knowing what she was going to do. She raised her hands while running across the front lawn and yelling to the top of her lungs for help as she crossed the direction of the motorcyclist. Waving her hands frantically, she flagged him down and told him, "My husband had an accident and fell down the stairs. Call 911. Now, if you take a look at the distance from her front door to where she had flagged down that motorcyclist, it was equivalent to almost half of a city block. It's a rather large community. Now, what sense did this make? What she did next made even less sense. As the motorcyclist got on his phone to call 911 and stayed with the operator at the scene, she left him there to continue across the street to her neighbor's house, the distance of a city block away from her front door. When she got there, she beat on the glass front door as hard as she could. Her neighbor admitted that he was startled with the force she applied to that glass. She requested that he also call 911 because her husband had an accident in which he fell down the stairs and possibly died. Now, the across the street neighbor got in his golf cart with her on the passenger side, and they rushed back to the home she had just fled across the expansive neighborhood to come meet him at. When they reached her front door and her porch, she continued with her bizarre behavior as both men went into her house to render assistance to her husband. She chose to sit on her front porch and wait outside. Does that sound like a wife to you? Are you a man that's being treated like a mindless idiot by a woman that is supposed to be in your corner? Then get yourself a copy of the audiobook White Women Behaving Racistly from Audible Books, and find out why women are not treating men in a form of reverse sexism, but with the same tactics racists used against the people they oppressed in the past. Find out how you have been trained to serve since you were a male child, and how your boy is being trained the same way. Links in the description. With the police and the paramedics on the way, her neighbor returned to her side and admitted to her that there was nothing that he could do, because it appeared that her husband had been dead for some time. So he didn't die just then. She had let him lay there for a while. Now, oddly enough, if anyone should have done something, it should have been her, because she had over a decade of experience as a nurse in CPR and first aid. But she did not move from that spot until the police arrived. A female police officer that arrived on the scene comforted the pretending grieving wife, and deceased brother, who was a police officer in the neighborhood county, also arrived on the scene. Although this death was out of his jurisdiction, he was concerned about his brother. He said he hated to see his brother in that condition, and who would? Who would want to see their family member this way? Just imagine, this man is dead, face down, in the home, his own mansion, with no real serious medical condition. And the worst part of it all is that he is wearing clothing that is drenched in wet and dried urine over the last 3 days. This was no accident. When the police questioned Clayton's wife on her whereabouts when her husband fell, she gave the story that she was out front mowing the lawn. This was ridiculous on its face because they lived on over 2 acres of land. Even if you took the best conventional ride-on mower, it would take many hours in the heat and steam of that area to complete it. Now, instead of pretending to care for a lawn that any millionaire would have to contract out, wouldn't it be easier to take care of your sick husband who urinated on himself for 3 days? The warning signs were there 2 years before Stephen's death that he should have gotten out of this particular relationship. 2 years prior to his death, Stephen awoke from a sound sleep, screaming and yelling at the top of his lungs. Why? because he had an arrow shot from a crossbow lodged in the back of his head. Yes, if you guessed, the same loving and giving, caring wife who just poisoned him to death was the culprit. Now, this is a pretty weird story. The police in that particular incident were summoned to the scene back then, along with paramedics, but she said it was all a big misunderstanding. She said that she was trying to practice loading the crossbow downstairs in their home, but couldn't. So she took it upstairs to the room where it accidentally went off into the back of her husband's head. I think this was his first attempt to take his life. You see, the police and her husband brought this story, and she was not charged. She wasn't charged in the case. Stephen Clayton's body was transported to the local funeral home at his wife's request to be cremated the next day after he died, lying in his own urine. But his brother and family thought this was strange, along with his manner of death. So they asked the local coroner to do a forensic toxicology test on his body. This test was requested without the permission of his wife, who was in a rush to have his body released from the funeral home so he could be cremated. Now, when the toxicologist test came back, they had elevated levels of the particular chemical in Visine, tetrazoline. Now, tetrazoline, which changed the coroner's belief that his death was from natural causes to murder. The coroner scheduled a meeting for his wife to come in so she could shed some light on how the tetrazoline got into his system. Now, what the wife didn't know was that the police and the FBI were in the next room listening in on that conversation. Once the questioning started about her husband dying of suspicious circumstances, Mrs. Clayton's mood began to change. When the coroner said he died because of the elevated levels of tetrazoline in his system, Miss Clayton said, yes, that's in his Visine. So she knew it. She began to save herself by lying on her husband's use of that particular chemical. Once again, by the time the investigation had come into the room to join the conversation and read her Miranda rights, Miss Clayton's news story was that, yes, he always placed some eye drops in his drinks, and especially in his coffee to help him go to the bathroom and not to be constipated. So she's saying he did this himself. The investigator said to her, so he placed in his own coffee Visine. They asked her, did you make his coffee? She said, no, she didn't make his coffee. He made his own coffee. Then the investigator asked, how did he make his own coffee if he was incapacitated for 3 days stuck in bed? She retorted, I know you guys think I killed my husband, but I didn't. She ended that interview abruptly and went back home with the investigators following her in tow. They weren't going to let her get away. They wanted more questions on this particular wife. Now, at the house, investigators continued the investigation and recorded it at the same time, which is where Miss Clayton decided to change her story once again to protect her ass from going to prison. Now, she admitted to poisoning her husband because he abused her, she said, and sexually assaulted her, which was completely out of character with anybody and everyone that knew him back to his mother. In many of these cases that we bring you here on Killer Wives, the wives always try to stay out of jail by saying their husbands hurt them, and they try to defend themselves, a self-defense case. Now, in doing so, they must besmirch his character so bad that a jury would buy her self-defense argument. Miss Clayton, who never mentioned any trouble in her marriage, would now insist that her husband hit her, kicked her, and choked her over the 5 years of their entire marriage. Now, and all of this, without as much as a police report, marks on her body, or any admission to her closest girlfriend. She said she gave him the eye drops in his water because she wanted him to suffer a little bit, not to kill him. She said that she only gave him the 1 dose on Thursday, but if that statement was true, he would not have died on Saturday morning. He would have died on Thursday night promptly. You can't make it past a day with that entire flask of Visine. Lana Clayton was arrested on August the 31st of 2018 and charged with the murder of her husband. She took a plea deal by admitting to the murder instead of facing the death penalty. The plea deal gave her 25 years in prison. Her lawyer and her will concoct a story during the sentencing that she was dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder from being sexually abused long before she ever met her husband, And this is why she attempted to kill him after he tried to sexually assault her. Now, prior to her arrest, she attempted suicide at the mansion, where she killed her husband just days before by taking pills and turning on the gas on the stove, similar to a soap opera or movie, but it didn't work. After she was released from the hospital, she was arrested promptly. Her motive for murdering her husband was to gain his wealth, the home, and land and settlement. In fact, it was she that suggested that they move from North Carolina to South Carolina to build the George Washington replica mansion done in a Greek revival style, because she knew that if he died without a will, she would get all of his assets. Now, and leading to her guilt in this case was the fact that he did have a will. And it is this will that neighbors believe she burned in the fire pit behind the house one day after she murdered him, ensuring that she would be sole beneficiary of all he had built over an entire lifetime. A clear and cut case of theft by marriage. For Killer Wives, this is Charles Rivers. Thank you for joining us.